No, the one that's going to which one's going to be? Let me. Oh no, sorry.
Minutes or?
Yeah, that's right.
I think low power LAN, I think power, or is it
No. For example, and so yeah, let me try it.
Excuse me.
Before
you go,
you have to look at the agenda. Figure out a slot. I should respond to Maynard's email.
And they see it through the video? Oh, okay, okay. Jump in.
That's why you guys were so damn.
Oh, this is power. That is. This is really sensitive. It's 2 minutes after the start time.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi guys, this is WebPush work group. If you're not here for WebPush, you may want to go and find the right work group. Next slide.
Sorry, that's all right. I got it.
All right, no will statement. If this is not your first session, I'm sure you've gone through this. So if you haven't, download it from the website, IETF.org, and then go through it. We got blue sheets circulating, and we got note takers and JavaScript. So yeah, we are good. All right, here's the agenda. Right. So there hasn't been much progress. I did poll the work group to see if you want to adopt the WEP ID, but we'll do that again when Martin is going to present it. So let's get into it unless someone wants to bash the agenda. Anyone? No? Okay. Brian? You're going to share this.
All right. And I think this is on. Okay, slide. Okay, so just to cover what we've done since the last IETF, that we published 2 drafts. There was some discussion from Canon on a scenario related to subscription sets. You may recall that we started with the ability for the server to provide a subscription set, and the server was making all the decisions to allow the aggregation of subscriptions. The scenario from Canon was a proxy that was acting basically as a user agent for a number of different devices, where it wanted to have control over how the various subscriptions were aggregated, so basically to have different subscription sets. So we made changes to accommodate that. In addition, At the last IETF, we talked about message collapsing or message updates. So basically, you have an outstanding message that hasn't been delivered to the user agent, and now there's an update to that, perhaps number of mail messages or something of that sort. Now you can do another post to a particular topic that belonged to and replace that message and basically delete it. That has been added. For the 04, Martin, this is very sensitive. For the 04 draft, we had some feedback from Mozilla that we had a default behavior where if there was not a TTL specified, it would default to 0. And Mozilla was seeing many cases where that was unexpected to the user agent, and so messages were going missing. And so we made that required, and it is no longer a default. In addition, we added push message urgency, which allows an application server to indicate what it believes an urgency of message, very low, for example, for an advertisement, higher for other messages. Then it also allows a user agent to filter on that urgency to basically say, I don't want to wake up for an advertisement. Wake me up for, a very important message. So we've added those capabilities. We also had a pending issue where, along with an acknowledgement returned by the user agent, there was a potential to return some diagnostic data. And for the lack of any data around that particular scenario, we've gone ahead and closed it and the pull request for the time being.
And how interested people are in working on the problem if it is a problem.
We don't have very many pending issues at this point, basically 3. So there's the sender and client authentication issue, which is potentially addressed by Vapid if adopted, and Martin will be talking about that in a bit. I wanted to make some editorial changes to the security considerations sections, just to have informative references to both the content encryption draft and, if adopted, the authentication draft. Maybe include some principles. Again, they're being covered by Martin. And then finally, there's the issue of simplifying acknowledgements, which has been discussed on the mailing list. And most of my presentation is going to be about that. So today, during the subscription for messages, the user agent gets back a number of link relations. One of those is the push link relation, which is used by the application server to send messages through the push service to the user agent. The other is receipt subscription, the push : receipts. Both of those need to be distributed to the application server. The application server then uses the push receipts link relation to request a subscription for receipts. Slide. In the new proposal, we can basically, yeah, it's great. We can just skip the rest of the slides. No. Just kidding. So in the new proposal, the first step is we can eliminate this push receipts. It doesn't have to be returned. It doesn't have to be sent to the application server. Slide. So as I said, the application server would get this receipts link relation from its user agent, and it would then need to say, please give me a receipt subscription from the push service. Next slide. Don't need to do that anymore. Slide back. So we can also cut this behavior. It's no longer necessary for the application server to have to create a receipt or request a subscription to a receipt. Next slide. So I want to note that if your implementation doesn't care about receipts at all, nothing changes. You'll your application server will post a message, and we'll get back is successful. This message was created, and here's your location of your message resource. If you are interested in receipts today, it's somewhat complicated. You first must monitor for receipts using that receipt subscription that you requested in the earlier step. You will provide your subscription in the post with a message to indicate that you want to get a receipt, and that's where the acknowledgement should be returned to. You'll get your 201 location of your message, and then if you're monitoring at some point, you're going to receive a receipt. We've agreed to a 204 and then a path to the original message that was created by the and returned by the push service. Next slide. This is a little complicated. So now you don't start monitoring for receipts at the beginning. You go ahead and push your message. You eliminate having to pass in this receipt, and you indicate that you prefer that the server responds async. You get back a 202 that it's accepted, the location of the message, and a params push receipt. And that is being used to basically, as the monitor. You do a get on that, and then you'll get your acknowledgement. Next slide goes into a bit more detail. So we need some way of indicating that we want to get back an acknowledgement. There's already a prefer header for respond async. It seems like we could reuse this and indicate that we're waiting then for a response. Next slide. The expectation is if you're using a 202 that you need to provide a status monitor. So basically we can provide the receipt that was a resource location that was returned by the push service for us to listen to for updates on the status of this. Next slide. So when this was discussed on the mailing list, there were some concerns about how many pending gets a particular application server might have to open to get all of these receipts. So looking at it today, the best case scenario is if a user agent gets back a push resource from its push service and distributes it to one application server, which I think is the default expectation, but it's not required, could hand it off to as many servers as it wants. The push service should be able to return the same status monitor, if you will, the same receipt for message delivery requests from an application server to the same push resource. It should know that there's a relationship between the two of those. That would mean that the application server would monitor one resource for receipts from one subscription from a specific user agent, and that would be the best case implementation.
This is just a minor comment on the
Next slide.
$589 billion. Every time I see.
So there's been some discussion, and this will probably be what we mainly want to talk about today, is whether or not there should be some symmetry between the application server and the push service with subscription sets similar to what we have between the user agent and the push service. So Martin's proposal was basically if there was some way that the application server could correlate what particular resource it wants to get back receipts on, this would be useful and more efficient. So we didn't discuss this a great deal on the mailing list, but it seems like Martin is up to talk about it in more detail.
Yeah. So one of the concerns here is that you have an application server that sends very large numbers of messages, and those messages each get their own receipt thing to monitor. which means that the application server, if they're interested in receipts for very large numbers of messages, potentially have, for n messages, have to make n monitoring requests and then get n pushes on n independent monitoring requests, which I think is something that sounds bad.
I don't think that's quite true. I don't think it's one per request. I think it's one per subscription, which might be...
Which
yes.
in the degenerate case will be one per request. And we see a lot of cases where application servers send one message to a very large number of people, not multiple messages to the one person. So the only sort of correlation that you would have is not only to the same person, but to the same subscription. If you're sending multiple messages to the same subscription, which is a very narrow definition in this space. An application server sends to lots and lots of people and potentially has multiple subscriptions for individual people. And if by chance you happen to be sending messages to the same instance of an application, then that, yes, you can get reuse of your receipt subscription, but otherwise you would not. And so having some way to glom them together would be, I think, highly valuable. I think as an application server, I want maybe one receipt subscription per push service that I might be interacting with. That's a far more manageable and scalable scenario, or maybe a handful per push service, depending on how the push service is architected. That would be cool with me as well, but tens rather than millions is the sort of thing I'm thinking about here.
I'd also note that this issue is not created by the simplification. It's been something that we've had.
It is created by the simplification in the sense that there was text in the original document that would allow an application server to do this sort of aggregation. It wasn't very good. I'll give you that much.
Joe Hildebrand from the floor. If you were willing to let this be up to the push server, then it could just hand out the same URI multiple times to you. And Martin said if it knew that it was you. It could also decide that it wanted to split up your traffic a little bit and give you different ones. And if you're already listening on that URI, you keep going. And if he gives you a new one, you have to make a new connection.
Yeah, the situation today is we talk about authentication, but we don't have required authentication, and so the dependency is on some sort of ambient information.
Yeah, so there's a number of ways you can slice this particular one. Martin Thompson. Sorry, shit. So there's a number of ways you can cut this. The push service could, yes, if it has some way of identifying you, because maybe it's the same connection, or maybe it has some authentication information that you volunteered, or maybe it fondled some lizard giblets or something like that. Whatever it needs to do in order to get that information, it could then decide to send you the same URI in response to the thing. And you might be sad as a result of that, because now you're getting receipts for something over here where you actually wanted them over here because it's made some inference about what's going on your end and the architecture of your application server that is incorrect. So it might be that your outbound requests to send the push messages are all aggregated through the one sender, and then that you've got a back end that's looking for the receipts, and those requests need to be split up somewhere. There's a very simple solution that I'm suggesting here, which is have the application server suggest that you might want to use the existing subscription that you gave it last time. And if it doesn't provide that, then you can provide it a new one.
The most important part or one important thing is that the quality is started.
Did you have a slide on that? Any more on this one? Or this is where we're at? Yeah. So the way we do subscription sets right now is that when you request a subscription, you say, and by the way, I have this subscription set already. if it makes sense for you to do so, please put the subscription in this set. And you would make the same request in this case. You would say, oh, by the way, I already have this receipt subscription set over here. If it's convenient for you, use it.
You're suggesting that would go in the post when the application server posts the message when it asks for a receipt.
Yeah. So I've already got one, thanks. If you want to use that one, it would be really great if you could do that thing. And the application server would have to look for that being echoed back and have to deal with the fact that it could be different in some cases. But
basically, you'd like it to mirror the language that we have around subscription sets with the user agent, and that the server might return
exactly
something
the same
different.
language.
Yep. Okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay, then I will create a pull request for this for review on the mailing list.
Just a quick question. So this was with 202 status code or 201? This update thing. Oh, so in this case, when it creates or when the application server sends to the push server, does it send? Will it get a 202 back?
Are you talking about the case for when it requests a receipt?
Yeah. Well, this
My
is
proposal says a 202 when you request a receipt, and you provide the status monitor then.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Yep. I think that's a detail that we missed, and I think yes. Thank you for asking us to confirm that. I think that's a great idea.
You're also comfortable with the prefer respond async then?
I don't actually think we need it, but
you need to have some way of saying I want a receipt, right?
Right.
You need to pass something.
Right, and I think that's a good way of dealing with that as well. Yep, that fits. And we don't have to define any actual mechanisms for that to work. We just go, there's this thing over there and this thing over there, and we'll just like glue them together. Yep.
Actually, so how so do you feel like this is almost ready, you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
We know this. We know.
If you get this done. Okay. So can I just see a hand of how many people have actually read the most recent draft? Okay. And how confident are you that this is ready to go to last call after we get this reflected? Well, whatever we talked about. Well, how many people are uncomfortable with the status of the draft at the moment? Can you stand at the mic and tell us what is making you uncomfortable?
Sure. Patrick Linsky from Cisco. I like everything. I like pretty much everything in the new draft which I've read. I haven't read 100% of it yet, but I think that we should be looking at closer into how we can use urgency for a couple of additional semantics, in particular around prioritization and potentially around some of the subscription stuff. Because as Martin was bringing up around subscriptions and kind of guiding the server to the subscription to the right server, prioritization again is something where you might want to have a different pool handling high priority stuff versus low. Martin asks if we can talk about this later.
Because we talked about this in the past, and this is an interesting topic to discuss.
I'm happy to talk about it later. It's just something I'd rather if that were already in the draft rather than saying
I've
yes.
also talked with other people about it, and it should be an interesting discussion to have. So if we have the time, I'd like to have a
separate mic for the chairs. So let's parking lot that, get through the agenda that we've got, and then come back and talk about it today if we still have time, which I hope we will.
That sounds great.
Does anybody else have issues? I hope there's a couple of other people who are in the room who are planning to read it as a part of last call. Can I see some hands on that? Thank you. You were the one I was looking at in particular. Just the record to show I was pointing at Brian Trammell.
Thanks, Brian. So I went looking for images, and it turns out that you get lots of pictures of trucks when you search for this. This is the model of car that is dominant in Grand Theft Auto, apparently. So there you have it. Next. So we had this request that push servers were unhappy with the situation that they weren't able to do anything at all to identify the application servers in some sort of standard way. And so this draft basically puts a very minimalist view on this one. We requested application servers generate themselves a signing key, and that they generate a token. And they don't have to do this, but they can bind this token to the push subscription URL that they're actually sending the message to, so that it can't be lifted and replayed across different URLs. We ask that they put an expiration time in there, and then if they want to, they can put their email address or a link to contact details on a website somewhere. This has actually made some of our privacy people a little bit nervous, because we're actually going to store this information now, and storing contact details is not the greatest thing. We do it, but we do it very reluctantly. It may be that we actually don't store this information, and instead, if someone's misbehaving, we wait until the next, we flag them as misbehaving, and then wait until we get another message from them, and then use that to contact them. That's a discussion that we're having internally about this. But generally speaking, the powerful property that we're looking to gain out of this is some way to correlate requests over time, so that the push service can look at individual senders, not necessarily knowing anything about them, but build up a reputation for their behavior, and identify new actors as opposed to old reliable actors, and ultimately do things like, well,
interesting topic. And,
when Facebook tells you that they're going to start sending messages, you better be prepared. And you can do things like say, well,
address this in the IETF, and
would be really what's the key that you're going to be using to sign these messages, so that we can identify and provision and make sure that we don't treat you as a denial of service attack, because it sure as hell looks like one when they start.
At some in your
and
slides,
the
you said that, scalability is not a concern.
thing that I like about this,
I'm not really sure about this.
The thing that I like about this is the last point here, which is that user agents, when they make a subscription, they can limit the use of that subscription to people who have a particular key.
One bit over the
and so I think this is for the best feature, which means that I can deploy my application and know with some reasonable degree of certainty that only my application servers are going to be able to push messages to that application. And the push service will reject attempts to push to those subscriptions in the absence of one of those keys.
Patrick, you say push service rejects. What are your thoughts about dropping rather than rejecting?
It seems like it's a fairly wide range.
Oh, silent drop.
And I'm wondering whether we think that we're
that
going
may
to
be a
go
denial
after
of
the
service
whole
mitigation
range of
technique that the push
characteristics
service
that's
employs.
here, as opposed to focusing.
Yes.
Because
we all know
yeah,
that if a message has a TTL of a day, and you send me a message, and a day later you heard nothing about that message,
a lot of jobs. So maybe you want to have a different
actually normal behavior. And so if the push service is actually lying about storing that message, then to the outside world, no one has any way of knowing.
The thinking currently that we can
so
find
that's actually a
solution.
pretty good method of dealing with that.
Great.
I like rejection, but
I like it too,
but there will be cases where, yes, I think we're not going to provide a hook for that. I think it's just going to be a push service choice.
Okay, it would be unfortunate if we wrote this back in such a way that a rejection is mandatory.
It is currently mandatory.
Okay, I think it would be useful to allow for the spec to allow that behavior, so that you're not out of specs if you're dropping.
Yeah.
I think that might be something we can push into the main document with this one. So I think in general we want to have that choice available to the push service, because if someone's acting badly, then we can just, okay, thanks, got your message.
So, Darshak Thakur, Cable Labs. So, I read through the draft and I just had a question. How does it work in the context of a message subscription? I wasn't able to follow that part. So, let's say, I mean, the model that we have is right now, user agent might just go and create its first subscription set.
Problem that running
And at that time, it may not even have a push, an application server to give it to.
Because
so typically, if you look at it in the context of the WebRTC, the W3C API,
for example, 802.
it's too late in the day. If you look at
is there any
that
problem,
context,
or is
the application requests the creation of a subscription. So the request from the application triggers the creation of the subscription. So what actually happens, and there's pull request, I don't know if we merged it. I think we might have merged it already, is when the application requests the creation of the subscription, they say, and by the way, here's a key. And that key goes up in the request to the push service
lack of IP adoption
when it creates a subscription, and then that subscription is now bound to that key.
Sigfox, I don't know about Sigfox, but is it
We've implemented
mainly
this, by
the
the way, and I think it
ND,
works
because
out
the ND is not
perfectly fine.
optimized? Is that the primary reason? Do we have any documentation
That's
from
a Google.
SDO saying
So-
that we have considered IP, but we
next,
have decided
please.
not to use IP for these reasons?
Uh,
Did they state those
so-
reasons?
This is the kind of unfortunate state that we're in at the moment.
No.
I'm guessing that this will resolve itself some way. Eventually, either the entire world will require the use of this, or it will be optional for the entire world, but currently it's mostly voluntary. So the service that we've deployed, it is voluntary. Other servers will require it. So as a practical matter,
but maybe there
I
are
believe that
different
we're going to
reasons
have
they
to
don't
say
want to run
that
IP,
application
because they
servers are going
don't
to have to do this
traditionally
in order to get their
run-
messages through.
They don't probably are not familiar
Simply
with
because
how IP
a lot of
world
clients
works. So
won't be
that's
reachable
one of the
without it.
things I see.
I think that's okay, but it's not something I'm proud of. If anyone has any ideas on how we can address that, I'd like to hear them. But I don't expect anything right now. And we have one more, I think. One of the concerns that was raised about this, and we had some discussion about it, was that the voluntary contact information that's included in this token is entirely unauthenticated. I can provide Joe's email address in the token, and the push service will probably happily accept that until such time as Costin is looking at the number of messages that I generated and sends an email to Joe saying, hey, why the hell are you sending so many messages? And Joe goes, eh? Or it lands in Joe's spam bucket or something like that and disappears. So
There is no IP
I
for
think
the
this is
moment
perfectly
because they think
acceptable.
We know everything. And right
As
now,
a
they're
practical
actually,
matter, the identity that we're
Okay,
talking about
maybe
is the public key.
we could have gone a little bit slower on
And that
this
is
one.
the thing that we want to hang all these properties off. If by sending that email to Joe, you find out that it was actually Joe who was making all these requests, and he responds, you get some sort of verification that it is Joe that's involved, you can mark your record as having authenticated Joe's email address against this particular public key, and you can proceed on that basis. But you wouldn't want to make any decisions based on the fact that these contact details have been provided or not. If it says that this is Facebook, don't believe that it's Facebook.
Joe Hildebrand from the floor. Is this a place where I could set up mine with a policy that says I'm going to send you an email and you have to click on the link I send you before I'm going to start processing?
I imagine that what's more likely to be the case there, because this is all going to be completely automated on some server that is going to receive the responses from the push service and just say, oh, look at that, it's a 202, great, proceed. It's not going to have any way to feed that information back to the person that wrote the code or the person that decided to put that string in there. But what might happen there is that in some circumstances, the push service might gate greater access to capacity or features or something or other on being able to contact someone and say, look, you're sending a lot of messages in. We're now giving you a worse class of service than you could get. Can you please confirm that the traffic that you're sending me is legitimate? And we'll have that conversation, and then you can turn it on. That's the sort of thing that we see this being used for more than anything else. And probably the most important use for it is all of a sudden your particular application server has gone from sending, I don't know, 1,000 messages an hour to 1,000 messages a second. What the hell? We're going to turn you off if you don't respond in 15 minutes. That sort of thing.
As an admin, I might want to, that seems like it might be information I'd like to know, because probably I'm under attack or something else has gone horribly wrong. There's a process that's restarted, or who knows what.
This is why you volunteer this information.
Right. And at which point I don't mind if you validate it early in the process, I guess.
Yeah, so the implication here is that it might be validated at any time by the push service.
I think the question,
we don't have any mechanisms for doing so automatically.
Nor do I think you necessarily need to, as long as you've got an appropriate error for policy violations or that kind of thing. So as long as you keep that in mind.
Well, we're just gonna pretend that the message went through, aren't we?
It's fine.
Yeah. I think that's all I have on that one. We have the question though. Oh, adopt.
So I did pull the mailing list adopting this draft, and I got one reply. How many people have read the draft? Can I see the hands? Okay. That was about 5 or 6. This is I mean, these are the guys that's going to be implementing and deploying this. It's already deployed. Okay. Do anyone feel, do anyone feel like they have to jump on the mic to object getting this draft adopted? Okay, go on. Can you go to the mic, please?
Ryan Raymer, Microsoft. Just a clarification, how does this impact the milestones, if at all?
So this is an optional feature, so it's not going to affect the core draft, as far as I can tell. I mean, unless you want to mandate this, right? And then
I think the current plan is to include an informative reference as
Right.
here's an example of what you could do.
So it's not going to affect the main milestones. I mean, okay. All right. So not seeing any objections. I'm gonna pull the mailing list one more time. Please respond with an ARC if you're interested in seeing this draft adopted, and we'll talk to the AD about adding a milestone for this.
Is there anybody else in the room who would like it adopted but hasn't had a chance to say so on the mailing list yet? I don't see any extra hands. There's one extra hand. Okay. I'd say that on the list then, if you wouldn't mind. That would be really helpful.
So you want to just go over the content? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, because I wasn't expecting spanners in the last meeting. So we had discussion about the encrypted content encoding stuff, and Eka observed that if we're going to do signing for other reasons in HTTP and we're doing encryption, there are interesting interactions between signing and encryption that need to be very carefully considered. Basically, the basic problem is that you can't do signing and encryption as 2 separate steps and expect the overall thing to be safe, because you, depending on which order they're applied in, one or other can be removed and replaced by something else. And there's a bunch of research on this and how you manage it. I haven't thought through all the implications of that, but it will likely delay the content encoding stuff until such time as we've reassured ourselves that there is no problems or that we have sufficient mechanisms in place to deal with that. That's now going to be the only thing that's stopping us from shipping documents, I imagine, given the status of the protocol draft, which is basically a handful of pull requests away from being done from Brian's presentation. And I have nothing to do on the web push side of this stuff because all I did was update it recently to the changes that were in there. So update the references. So that's where that's at. We're running on internet drafts at the moment. I don't feel any particular urgency to publish unless anyone feels that they need to see an RFC number sooner rather than later. But I don't know how to play this one because it's just, there's problems and we need to sort them through.
Okay. So Mike Jones, just as an individual, how do you plan to work through the encryption signature issue? There's certainly a lot of expertise, including Ecker and a few of the rest of us, that you could draw upon.
Well, the first step is understanding the nature of the problem and the available options for solving it. So the basic techniques for solving it are well understood, and it's not particularly difficult to address. The problem is understanding the application to HTTP in the way that it's being used. And what we have at the moment is a bunch of generic tools that can be applied in any number of ways, which makes it very difficult to understand it in context. And so what we're going to have to do most likely is change the scope of the tools that we're providing in order to more narrowly define the problems that can be solved and therefore constrain the problem in a way that we can actually solve it. That makes it difficult, I think. But given that I've only thought about this in my jet lag state for about 30 minutes, I'm not going to commit to anything in particular at this point. But I know all the people who do this stuff, and we know how to deal with it. So we'll work through it.
Do you want to say anything about this? Or? No.
Yeah.
Unless.
So, any more comments on this?
So when we adopted this content encoding draft, the idea was to progress the core draft and the content encoding draft together and submit it to ISG at the same time, or making it RFC at the same time. But we don't really, unless we can still progress the core draft and then see what we want to do with the content encoding draft, depending on the status of the HTTP draft.
Yeah, so the uncomfortable part there is that we don't have any dependency on the problem being solved. It's just that we have a dependency on the draft that has a dependency on having the problem solved. So yeah, like I said before, I'm not particularly fussed about timing unless other people want to push on this one. I think we can afford to let that one take its time, and it may just be that it requires a week because we sit down and have a meeting, work through the thing, work out what sort of constraints we can put on the problem space and write some text. It may be that simple, or it may be that we have to look at the interplay of content encodings, and there's some weird new content encoding that you use that is the combination of encryption and signing.
So are you going to sit down with Eka and all of them and then try to figure out?
I will take the responsibility for solving the problem. However,
thank you very much. All right, cool.
My name's on all of the involved drafts. I'm motivated to make sure that the problem goes away, however it needs to go away.
All right, great. Okay, cool. Patrick, you want to talk about the priorities then?
Patrick Linsky from Cisco. Yeah, so the prioritization, the urgency field today is like tantalizingly close to a message priority indicator, and it would be great to look at how we can use it for that. So you talked about a couple different things earlier, ad delivery, not waking up the radio, et cetera. But I think there are a bunch of other dimensions that's very useful to look at as well. So reordering of items so that high priority things come first on a reconnect. Routing differently. So for example, high priority items going to a different set of servers, potentially via some sort of subscription metadata. And kind of quality of service guarantees, or not guarantees, but targets based on what those priorities are. I think it would be really nice to figure out, like, on the one hand, I don't want to like delay getting something out there. On the other hand, I think that it would be really nice to figure out at least what's a list of the things that we would want to do with prioritization like next, and make sure that we're not defining urgency in such a way that, like, 6 months from now we're like, oh crap, that's not going to work. We're going to have to add a new field. So I think that's my main concern there, is a bit of a sanity check, and like some brainstorming around what are all the things that we think would be good to use prioritization with, what are the things we think would be not only good to use prioritization for, but would be beneficial to be specifying, and how does that dovetail with the urgency stuff. So that's my concern.
Do you think we need more granularity?
I don't think we necessarily need more granularity. It's like, I haven't thought fully through how to project the way that we do prioritization internally within some of our applications is on 2 dimensions. And I haven't totally thought through how to project those 2 dimensions onto one value. So there's a separation between like the source of a message and the priority of that message. And those are probably mapped really nicely into different subscription classes. But I don't think we're missing granularity. I'm more concerned that, like, of the surprise. So I feel like it would be very worthwhile to go through the exercise to the degree of validating that we're not painting ourselves into a corner more than anything else.
So the draft currently says that the options are very low, normal, and high.
Yep.
So for example, if you were to open up that list, you'd have to be able to rank them in some sort of order, or you could turn it into a float, which would be you'd have as much granularity as you'd want, and you'd have a variety of other problems at that point.
Yeah, so I guess I'm more interested in the granularity. I'm more interested in questions around the interactions of like subscriptions and urgency, for example. So mechanisms for a application server to be able to convey the fact that after a day, a low priority message can just get dropped, which like we have a TTL, but there's like a can, and there's this fuzzy barrier between, like, I don't really care if you drop it, like drop these ones first, kind of like. So if I have a bunch of high priority stuff coming in, then like I'd rather you make the experience really great for the high priority stuff. And the TTL, I'd like it if you could deliver this within this TTL, but you don't necessarily need to. So those sorts of interplays between the features are what I'm concerned about, more than the granularity of the feature itself. What is, like, because those are the sorts of questions we're going to be asking ourselves in a year or in 18 months once we have some rollout, and I'm concerned about those features putting us in a bind.
Do you have a proposal for how to go about doing that analysis?
I'd say in terms of going out about doing the analysis, I'd love to get together two implementers and two consumers, and kind of write down what are the things you do prioritization for today. How would you like to be able to do prioritization?
Do you think we need to hold up last call for that?
Do you think you could do it well?
Yeah, can you get it done before we go to last call? I guess.
Yeah.
If that's going to happen relatively soon. Before Berlin.
Yeah. I think so. I would like to, if we can find, I'd like to find the right people to execute on that, because
anyone who cares about that is probably in the room right now.
So I guess that's a better way of asking this is who cares about this? Who cares about prioritization integration into other parts of the system? Okay.
All right. So there's four half raised hands. Okay. So if you can get with them and make some progress on this quickly, I'd say great. I'm not seeing enough other people jump up and down and say this is massively important that we necessarily ought to hold up the.
Agree. Yeah. Agree.
All right. So just make
I
progress on it
explicitly
quickly.
don't want to hold things up.
Good.
I just want to also figure out how to do this in parallel so we don't make a mistake that we regret. Too bad.
Yeah. So one of the results of such a discussion could be that, well, we have something, it may not be ideal, we need to work on some other things, but we can do them later. That would be a great outcome, in my opinion. But we need to make sure that we haven't painted ourselves into a corner.
Yes.
My analysis that I've done privately without the benefit of Patrick's perspective is that I think we can do some of the things that you want to do, or likely want to do, because I'm guessing based on what you've told me, without materially changing what we have currently. However, there may be some other things that you want to do that I don't understand very well, and so we need to have that conversation.
Alyssa Cooper. It might also imply that other people who are going to review this again one more time think about extensibility and how the draft deals with extensibility, because that might be a nice way around this. Is like, as long as people feel comfortable that right now the urgency mechanism is not extensible, right? But that might be fine. But just generally thinking about the points where extensibility might help, then if you feel more comfortable that in the future this isn't boxing you into a corner.
I think that's a fantastic suggestion. So for example, being able to determine what extensions are currently deployed on this server, that kind of thing. I mean, we've had that in a variety of other protocols in the past, and it's been really useful to get out of these kinds of things. It would be nice to not have to do EHLO just to add options later. I know. Anybody have anything else to say? Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Make sure everybody sign the blue sheets, please, which are somewhere. That's okay.
I wrote Martin to update to allow dropping messages.
Yes. Okay. Yes, that's what I remember as well. Which may have been wrong, but that's what I remember. Thank you so much for doing it. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for projecting the slide.